Listen, child. Beneath the Baobab's ancient sigh, where the river whispers secrets to the stars, sometimes, the very thing they scorn becomes the bridge to destiny. Remember the girl who wore her neck like a prayer? The dust in Uzoma village tasted like burnt earth and forgotten promises. It coated everything. The low, mud-brick huts huddled like sleeping goats, the sparse millet stalks straining towards a relentless sun, and the cracked, thirsty lips of its people. Among them walked Adaeze, 15 summers old, carrying water from the brown river on her head, her slender neck rising like a sapling seeking light above the jar's wide rim. It was long, unusually long, a curve that began at her shoulders and lifted her chin with a quiet, unconscious grace. To the village children, it was a handle for ridicule. "Giraffe!" they'd shout, darting between huts. "Adaeze carries the sky on a stick." Their laughter, sharp as thorns, pricked the humid air. Adaeze didn't flinch outwardly. Her mother, Neka, had taught her stillness. "Water doesn't argue with the stone in Wam," Neka would murmur, her own back bent from years of hauling firewood, her voice raspy like wind through dry reeds. "It flows around it. Be water." So Adaeze walked, her bare feet whispering against the hot sand. The heavy clay pot balanced impossibly steady. Inside, though, the shame was a constant ache, a dull throb beneath the hollow of her throat where the taunts landed. Her eyes, large and dark as wet river stones, held a depth that seemed too old for her thin frame. They scanned the ground, avoiding the smirks, the pointing fingers of women gossiping at the grinding stones, the scornful glances of elders who saw only awkwardness, not quiet strength. Her clothes, faded indigo patched with rough calico, hung loosely, emphasizing her frailty, her difference. Neka's hut stood apart, near the whispering riverbank where the giant baobabs cast long, skeletal shadows at dusk. It smelled perpetually of wood smoke, dried fish hanging from the rafters, and the faint, bitter tang of medicinal herbs Neka gathered. Poverty clung to them like the river mud. Their meals were thin oji porridge, their possessions few. Adaeze's only treasure was a smooth, gray river stone, cool against her skin, found years ago when she'd wept alone by the water. She kept it hidden in a small pouch tied beneath her dress. It was her secret anchor. The mockery wasn't just childish cruelty. It was the village's unease made manifest. Uzoma feared difference. A long neck? It wasn't sturdy, like the women who bore heavy yams. It wasn't hidden, like proper burdens should be. It was visible. Strange. Whispers followed Adaeze like flies. "Bad omen," muttered Mama Chitty, the village's self-appointed oracle of doom. Her beady eyes narrowed as Adaeze passed. Such a neck. It invites ill winds. Like her father's spirit, restless. Adaeze's father had vanished years ago, seeking work in the distant city, swallowed by its promises and leaving only silence and debt. The village blamed his absence on bad luck. Now they saw the echo of that misfortune in his daughter's form. One scorching afternoon, the taunting escalated. Kinachukwu, the blacksmith's burly son, emboldened by his friends, blocked Adaeze's path near the communal well. Sweat glistened on his broad chest. "Look at it," he jeered, reaching out a thick finger towards her throat. "Like a plucked chicken. Does it snap easy, Sky Girl?" His friends guffawed. The heavy water pot trembled slightly on Adaeze's head. Her knuckles whitened on the jar's rim. She could smell his sweat, the dust kicked up by his feet, the metallic tang of fear in her own mouth. "Be water," her mother's voice echoed faintly, but the water inside her felt like it was boiling. "Move keen," she whispered, her voice barely audible, strained thin by the effort of control. It was the first time she'd spoken back. "Or what?" Kinachukwu grinned, stepping closer, his shadow engulfing her. "Will your long neck reach out and bite me?" He gave her a sharp, mocking shove on the shoulder. It wasn't hard, but it was enough. The precarious balance shattered. The heavy clay water pot slipped, tilting, then crashed to the ground. Brown water exploded across the baked earth like a dying sigh, soaking Adaeze's feet, the shards of pottery glinting like cruel teeth in the sun. A stunned silence fell, heavier than the lost water. Kenechukwu looked momentarily startled, then smirked. The women at the well stopped grinding, their eyes wide. Adaeze stood frozen amidst the wreckage and the spreading dark stain on the dust. The shame wasn't a throb anymore. It was a flood, hot and choking, rising up that long, exposed neck to burn her cheeks and fill her eyes. She saw the fragments of her family's only large water jar. She saw the wasted water, precious as blood in this drought. She saw their faces, pity, scorn, amusement. Without a word, without looking at anyone, Adaeze turned. She didn't run. She walked, back straight, head held high on that long neck, away from the well, away from the stifling village, towards the riverbank path. The silence behind her was thick, broken only by the distant cry of a fish eagle. She walked past the last huts, the jeers of Kenechukwu's friends fading. She walked until the air cooled slightly near the river, carrying the scent of damp earth and papyrus reeds. She walked until the baobabs loomed, their ancient roots gripping the bank like giant hands. Only then, hidden by the curtain of trailing moss from a great tree, did she let the tears fall. Silent, hot rivers tracking paths through the dust on her cheeks. She sank to her knees on the cool, muddy bank, the rough bark of the baobab against her back. Her fingers found the hidden pouch, clutching the smooth river stone like a lifeline. She pressed her forehead to the cool earth, the scent of wet soil filling her nostrils. The weight of the shame, the poverty, the loneliness, it pressed down heavier than any water pot. Why was she shaped for scorn? Why was her very body a target? The river gurgled nearby, a sound that usually soothed, now sounding like indifferent laughter. Her tears slowed, leaving salty tracks. Exhaustion replaced the sharp sting of humiliation. She lifted her head, wiping her face with the back of her hand, smearing mud and tears. She looked out at the wide, brown river, sluggish under the afternoon sun. Something caught her eye. Not far from the bank, half submerged in the murky water, entangled in the reeds, something gleamed. Not like a fish. Not like a stone. It was dull metallic, catching a sliver of sunlight despite the silt. Something man-made, something not of the river. Something that hadn't been there yesterday. Adaeze blinked, her breath catching in her long throat. "What, child? Have you ever tasted loneliness? Not the quiet kind, but the heavy silence that sits in your bones when the world looks at you and sees only broken clay, only what doesn't belong." Adaeze's fingers trembled as they broke the water's surface. The river's chill bit deeper than Kenechukwu's shove. She grasped the object, cold, heavy, crusted in rust and slick algae. A metal box, no larger than her palm, its edges softened by time, its latch sealed shut by river silt. She clutched it, water dripping onto her already soaked dress, and scrambled back under the baobab's shadow. Its roots cradled her like the arms of a grandmother she'd never known. The box felt like a secret against her skin, but the shame from the well still clung, thick as the mud on her feet. She remembered the crack of the pot, the gasps, the way the village women had covered their mouths, not in sympathy, but in judgment. "Careless girl," their eyes said. "Bad blood." She pressed her forehead to the cool metal, breathing in the scent of wet iron and decay. Why? The question echoed in the hollow of her throat. Why did her neck curve like this? Why did her father vanish? Why did the air turn sharp when she walked by? Her mother found her there as dusk painted the sky in bruised purples. Nneka didn't speak at first. She simply knelt in the damp earth beside her daughter. Her own spine curved from years of bending to the unforgiving soil. Her calloused hand, smelling of wood smoke and bitter Uzoma leaves, rested on Adaeze's shoulder. No words, only the deep, slow rhythm of her breathing, the quiet strength of a woman who knew the weight of carrying on. "Come Nwam," Nneka finally murmured, her voice a low rasp like pebbles shifting in a dry stream. "The night carries its own eyes. We go home." Home. The small hut near the riverbank, where the thatch roof leaked when the rains came hard, and the packed earth floor held the chill of forgotten seasons. Inside, the air hung thick with the smell of yesterday's ogbono soup and the sharp, clean scent of the medicinal herbs Nneka hung to dry. Ojilishi for fever, a kwakwo unknown for cough. A single palm oil lamp cast long, dancing shadows. Nneka moved quietly, reheating the thin porridge. Adaeze sat on the low stool, the metal box hidden beneath a fold of her skirt. She traced the rough grain of the wood beneath her fingertips. "They broke the pot, Mama," Adaeze whispered, the words scraping raw. "Keen pushed me." Nneka stirred the pot, the wooden spoon scraping the clay. Her profile, etched by the flickering light, was weary. "Pots break, Ada," she said, her voice steady. "Water spills. Earth drinks it. It is gone." She turned, her dark eyes holding Adaeze's. "But you are not broken. They mock the branch that reaches for the sun while they are content in the shade." Adaeze looked down at her hands. "They say my neck, it's like Papa's. That it brought him bad luck. That it brought us bad luck." The words tasted like ash. Her father, Obinna. His face was a fading memory. A warm smile, strong hands that lifted her high, a voice that hummed old songs while he mended fishing nets. He'd left when the drought first cracked the earth, promising quick money from the city. 6 moons and Nwam, he'd said, kissing her forehead. "Then I return with salt cloth, maybe even sugar." 6 moons turned to 12, then 24. Only silence returned. And debt. The village whispered, "Foolish man. Probably dead in some gutter." Bad luck followed him. And now, it followed his daughter's shadow. Nneka's hand tightened on the spoon. "Your father," she said, her voice tight, "walked with his head high, like the heron watches the water. He was not ashamed of how the Creator shaped him." She scooped porridge into a cracked calabash bowl. The village forgets. They forget how he carried old Mama Yugo on his back when the fever took her legs. How he shared his last yam when the harvest failed others. She placed the bowl before Adaeze. "Shame is a hungry dog, Ada. Feed it with silence and it grows teeth." Later, lying on their shared sleeping mat, Adaeze listened to the river's murmur and her mother's slow, even breaths. The metal box pressed against her hip beneath the thin blanket. She thought of Kenechukwa's mocking grin, the shattered clay, the whispers of bad blood. She thought of her father's smile, swallowed by the distant, indifferent city. The loneliness wasn't just being alone. It was being seen wrong. Her body felt like a map everyone misread. Her long neck wasn't a bridge, it was a wall. Days bled into one another under the relentless sun. Adaeze walked the river path each dawn and dusk. The villages scorn a tangible thing at her back. She fetched water in a smaller, borrowed pot. Her steps measured, her eyes lowered. Yet she felt their stares. The children's giggles stifled behind hands. The women's glances heavy with unspoken judgment at the grinding stones. Mama Chitty's voice, sharp as a thorn, carried on the wind. "See how she carries herself now? Like something guilty. That neck. It knows the weight of misfortune. Adaeze worked beside Nneka in their small plot of stunted cassava, the soil crumbling like dust in their hands. Her mother's resilience was a quiet fire, but Adaeze saw the strain in the new lines around her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly when she lifted the heavy hoe. Poverty wasn't just empty bowls. It was the slow erosion of hope, the fear that tomorrow would only be a harder echo of today. One evening, returning from the river with the small pot balanced carefully, Adaeze passed the blacksmith's compound. The rhythmic clang of hammer on metal usually filled the air. Today it was silent. Kenechukwu stood near the forge, his broad shoulders slumped. His father, the blacksmith, sat hunched on a stool, head in his hands. The air crackled with a different tension, not mockery but despair. Adaeze paused unnoticed. She heard the blacksmith's low, broken voice. "The last of the iron keen. No traders came. How do we eat? How do we pay the chief's levy?" Kenechukwu kicked savagely at a lump of charcoal, sending sparks skittering. He looked up, his gaze raw and lost, and for a fleeting second it met Adaeze. The bully was gone. In his eyes, she saw a reflection of her own fear, the gnawing uncertainty, the crushing weight of circumstance. He looked away quickly, shame flushing his cheeks. Adaeze hurried on, her heart pounding strangely. Seeing Keen vulnerable was more unsettling than his taunts. Back in the hut's dim safety, Adaeze finally dared to examine her river find. Using a sharp stone and the edge of her mother's knife, she painstakingly scraped away the rust and silt caking the small metal box. The latch, corroded shut, resisted, then yielded with a gritty groan. Inside, nestled in a bed of hardened mud, lay not gold, not jewels, but something utterly unexpected. A tightly rolled cylinder of dry, brittle animal skin. Carefully, trembling, she unrolled it on the packed earth floor. The flickering lamplight revealed markings. Not village symbols. Not traders' tallies. Delicate, precise lines and curves etched in faded black ink. Letters. Words. A language unknown in Uzoma. Her father had known some city words, taught her a few before he left. This was different. Ancient looking. And at the bottom, a single clear drawing. A perfect circle, divided by a wavy line. Above the line, a stylized bird in flight. Below, unmistakable, elegant curves, the long, graceful neck of a heron. Just like hers. Adaeze's breath caught in her own long throat. Outside, the wind sighed through the baobab leaves, sounding like 1,000 hushed voices. Hear me. The greatest secrets often hide in plain sight. Like water beneath cracked earth. Waiting for the one who knows how to listen. Kenechukwu's shadow fell over the fragile scroll, like a sudden eclipse. Adaeze froze, the brittle animal skin trembling in her hands. Her heart hammered against her ribs, loud as the blacksmith's hammer. He saw the markings, the heron. He saw her secret, laid bare on the packed earth floor. Shame, hot and sharp, warred with a fierce, protective instinct. She scrambled to roll the scroll, clutching it tight against her chest, the cool metal box digging into her palm. What is that? Kenechukwu's voice was low, rough, stripped of its usual mocking edge. He didn't move from the doorway, his broad frame blocking the fading dusk light. He looked bewildered, hungry, not for mockery but for something. The despair Adaeze had glimpsed at his father's forge was etched deeper now in the lines around his eyes. Nothing, Adaeze whispered, her voice tight. River trash. She couldn't meet his gaze. He'll tell. He'll laugh. He'll make it another reason to scorn me. But Kenechukwu didn't laugh. He took a hesitant step inside the dim hut. The scent of wood smoke and dried fish seemed to thicken. Those marks, he persisted. his eyes fixed on her clenched hands, like the old ones, on the stones near the dry spring. He swallowed. My grandfather, he mumbled about signs. Before he passed. He looked lost, adrift from the bully he'd been days ago. The weight of his father's failing forge, the gnawing hunger in his belly. It had carved away his bravado, leaving raw uncertainty. Nneka appeared silently from the shadowed corner, where she ground cassava. Her presence was calm, an anchor in the sudden storm. She didn't chastise, didn't flinch. Her eyes, old and knowing, moved from Adeeze's terrified face to Kenechukwa's troubled one. The river gives, she said, her voice a low rasp. And the river takes, Kenechukwu. Sometimes, it gives back what was lost long ago. She gestured towards the low stool. Sit. The night air carries whispers best heard sitting down. Keen sat, awkwardly, his large frame making the stool creak. The silence stretched, filled only by the chirping of crickets outside, and the frantic beat of Adeeze's pulse in her ears. She couldn't trust him. Not after the well, the taunts, the shattered pot. Yet the raw need in his eyes mirrored the ache in her own spirit. Reluctantly, driven by her mother's silent command and the strange drawing of the heron, she uncurled her fingers. She laid the brittle scroll carefully on the mat between them, smoothing its edges under Nneka's watchful gaze. I found it, Adeeze said, her voice barely above a whisper. In the river. After. She didn't need to say after you pushed me. The memory hung heavy in the air. Keen leaned forward, his calloused blacksmith's fingers hovering over the markings, not daring to touch. The bird, he murmured. Like yours. He didn't say it mockingly. It was an observation, tinged with awe. He pointed a thick finger at the wavy line beneath the circle. Water. His finger moved to the stylized bird above. Sky. Then, hesitantly, to the elegant heron neck below the line. And the bridge. Nneka drew a slow breath, the scent of cassava flour mingling with the dust. Long ago, she began, her voice taking on the rhythm of the elders. Before Uzoma forgot, we knew the heron, not as a thing to mock, child. Her dark eyes settled on Adeeze, warm and fierce, but as the watcher, patient, silent. Its neck, not a burden but a gift, to see further, to reach deeper. She touched the drawing of the heron with a reverence that made Adeeze's throat tighten. This mark, the circle, the water below, the sky above, the heron between. It speaks of connection, of the deep places where sky and earth meet water. Adeeze stared at the scroll, then at her mother. But what does it mean, Mama? Why was it in the river? Perhaps, Nneka said softly. It was waiting for eyes that see differently, for a neck long enough to carry the weight of looking. She traced the faded ink. These words, they are old, older than Uzoma, a tongue of the ancestors perhaps, or a people who walked this land when the rivers ran full. Keen's brow furrowed. Can anyone read it? My grandfather. He mumbled about a spring. A hidden spring, said the old marks pointed the way. His voice cracked with a desperate hope that cut through Adeeze's lingering distrust. The drought, it's killing us. The well's low. The crops are dust. He looked from the scroll to Adeeze, his gaze intense. If this could show us water. Adeeze felt the weight shift. This wasn't just about her shame anymore. This was about cracked earth, hollow stomachs, her mother's weary eyes. About the fear she'd seen in Keen's father. The scroll felt heavier, hotter in her hands. A secret, yes, but maybe a responsibility? We need to know what it says, she breathed. Nneka nodded slowly. Knowledge is a sharp knife, and it can cut bonds, or draw blood. Who in Uzoma remembers the old ways? Who listens to the whispers in the dust? They fell silent. The village elders scoffed at anything beyond planting seasons and rain dances. Mama Chitty traded in fear, not forgotten tongues. The answer hung heavy and obvious. Old man Emeka. He lived alone beyond the Baobabs, where the land sloped towards the rocky hills. A figure of whispers himself. Some called him touched by spirits. Others said grief had stolen his wits after his family perished in a fever years ago. He was known to mutter to stones and collect strange, dry leaves. The village tolerated him, mostly avoided him. But Nneka, in her quiet way, sometimes left a bowl of porridge by his lean-to. The broken gourd, she'd say, often holds the sweetest water. Hope, fragile as the scroll itself, flickered in the hut. But with it came danger. If the village saw Adaeze and Keen, the mocked girl and the blacksmith's son, seeking out the mad old hermit, the whispers would turn to storms. What if the scroll was nothing? What if Emeka couldn't help? What if it did speak of water, and they failed to find it? The shame would crush them utterly. Yet the image of the heron, her neck, bridging the water and sky, burned in Adaeze's mind. She looked at Keen, no longer the bully, but a boy drowning in his father's despair. She looked at her mother, the lines of worry etched deep. She clutched the smooth river stone hidden beneath her dress. "We go at first light," Adaeze said, her voice finding a strength she didn't know she possessed. "Before the village wakes." It wasn't a question. It was a decision, carried on the long curve of her spine. Keen met her gaze, a flicker of the old defiance mixing with newfound determination. He nodded once sharply. The pact was silent, sealed in the dim light and the scent of dust and ancient ink. The night was restless. Adaeze lay beside her mother, the scroll hidden again in the metal box beneath their mat. She listened to the dry wind rattling the thatch, the distant, haunting cry of a night bird. Was it a heron? She thought of the river's hidden gift, of Keen's desperate hope, of the scorn that would turn vicious if they were discovered. She thought of the heron's neck, a bridge. But bridges could be crossed or burned. Just before dawn, as the sky bled gray at the edges, a sound shattered the fragile quiet. Not a bird, but a voice loud and harsh, carrying from the center of the village. Chief Obi's voice, thick with anger and fear. Adaeze sat bolt upright, her blood turning cold. She knew that tone. Trouble. Big trouble. And it was heading towards the riverbank. Towards them. Nneka's hand found hers in the darkness. A silent question in her touch. The pact, the secret, the fragile hope, all trembled on the edge of a blade. The village was awake and looking for someone to blame. Child, when the storm comes, it doesn't ask if you are ready. It simply breaks the sky. And sometimes, the bridge you fear to cross becomes the only path through the flood. Chief Obi's voice wasn't just angry. It was a blade scraping bone. Thieves. The word tore through the dawn hush, sharp enough to make the roosters fall silent. Food stolen from the chief's own storehouse. In this drought? While we starve. Feet pounded on dry earth. A gathering rumble moving towards the riverbank huts. Towards them. Adaeze's blood turned to river ice. Keen's eyes, wide with shared terror, locked onto hers. The metal box, the scroll, suddenly felt like stolen goods themselves. Nneka was already moving, her movements swift and silent. She snatched the brittle scroll from Adaeze's numb fingers and the metal box, thrusting them deep into a woven grain basket filled with dried ugba seeds. The pungent, fermented scent filled the small space. "Out," she hissed, her voice low and urgent. "Now. Through the back. To Emeka. Go like the wind hides." There was no time for fear, only the raw instinct to survive the coming storm. Adaeze scrambled through the low rear opening of the hut, Keen close behind, his bulk surprisingly agile. They plunged into the sparse scrubland behind the huts, the rough branches snagging at their clothes, the dust puffing beneath their bare feet. Behind them, the angry murmur swelled into shouts. Chief Obi's voice boomed near Neka's doorway. "Search!" The thief left muddy prints towards the river. Adaeze's heart hammered against her ribs, each beat echoing the accusation. Thief. The word branded her hotter than any mockery. They ran, not towards the village center, but away, skirting its edge where the land grew stony and the Baobab stood like ancient sentinels. The rising sun painted the world in harsh, revealing light. They ducked behind a massive, gnarled root, gasping for breath. Adaeze risked a glance back. A knot of men, led by Chief Obi and a scowling Kinachukwa's father, the blacksmith, stood outside their hut. Neka stood in the doorway, small but unyielding, her back straight, facing them down. Adaeze couldn't hear the words, only the sharp tones. She saw Mama Chitty pointing towards the river path, her mouth moving rapidly. They think you," Keen panted, wiping sweat and dust from his face. The realization dawned in his eyes, chased by a flicker of guilt. His push at the well, the shattered pot, it painted a target. "Or you," Adaeze whispered back, her voice raw. "Your father, the forge." Poverty made everyone a suspect. Difference made her an easy mark. The fragile trust forged over the scroll trembled. The shouting near their hut subsided, the men moving off, fanning out towards the riverbank, searching for phantom footprints. The immediate danger passed, but the air crackled with accusation. They had to move. Old Man Emeka's lean-to lay further out, nestled against a rocky outcrop where the earth bled red ochre. The path was lonely, exposed. Every rustle in the dry grass felt like a pursuer. They found him sitting cross-legged in the dust before his low shelter. A collection of strangely shaped stones arranged in a pattern only he understood. He was thin as a dried reed, skin like sun-cured leather stretched over bone. His eyes, clouded with age, seemed to look through them, not at them. The air smelled of dust, dried herbs hanging from his roof, and something faintly acrid. Crushed insects, perhaps. He hummed tunelessly, fingers tracing the contours of a smooth, black river stone. "Old man," Keen began, his voice unnaturally loud in the stillness. We need your wisdom." Emeka didn't look up. His humming continued, a dry, rasping sound. Adaeze stepped forward, her pulse pounding in her long throat. She pulled the scroll from the pouch Neka had quickly tied around her waist beneath her dress. She knelt in the dust before him, unrolling the brittle skin with trembling hands. The markings, the circle, the heron, lay exposed in the harsh morning light. The humming stopped. Emeka's clouded eyes snapped down, not to Adaeze's face, but to the scroll. A tremor ran through his gnarled hands. Slowly, almost reverently, he reached out. His fingertips, cracked and stained with ochre, brushed the faded ink of the heron's long neck. He traced the curve, then moved to the circle, the wavy line, the bird in flight. A low sound escaped him, not a word, but a sigh that carried the weight of dry riverbeds and forgotten suns. "Yugo Miri," he breathed, the Igbo words for water heron sounding like sacred dust. His finger tapped the drawing of the heron below the wavy line. Not burden, bridge. He looked up then, his milky eyes seeming to focus, not on Adaeze, but on the shape of her, the long line of her neck against the dawn sky. A ghost of recognition flickered in their depths. The watcher sees where sky kisses earth, where water sleeps. Hope sharp and painful, pierced Adaeze's fear. "The words, old man," she urged softly, her voice barely a whisper. "Can you read the words? Please. The drought, the village." Emeka's gaze drifted back to the scroll. His lips moved silently, forming unfamiliar syllables. He traced the delicate, faded script with a trembling finger. Minutes stretched, filled only by the buzz of flies and the frantic beat of two young hearts. Keen shifted impatiently, scanning the path behind them. The village felt too close. Finally, Emeka spoke, his voice a dry leaf scraping stone. It sings of the dry time, when the great river turns its face away. He tapped the wavy line. It speaks of the hidden spring, where the earth mother's tears gather, deep beneath the watcher's feet. His finger moved to the stylized heron below the line. Beneath the bridge. Where? Keen burst out, unable to contain himself. Where is it? Emeka's finger traced the circle again, then moved deliberately to the bird in flight above the wavy line. The sky heron flies towards the setting sun. When the day bleeds, he paused, his brow furrowing as if wrestling with a distant memory. Then his finger drifted to a specific cluster of markings near the circle's edge. It counts the steps from the stone that weeps. Adaeze gasped. The stone that weeps. A solitary, tall rock near the dry spring bed. A half-day's walk west, towards the setting sun. Its surface was always strangely damp, even in the fiercest heat, collecting dew like tears. Village children dared each other to touch it. A landmark. A place of whispers. How many steps? Adaeze pressed, leaning closer. The scent of dust and old man filled her nostrils. Emeka squinted at the markings, his lips moving silently again. He held up 3 gnarled fingers, then 2 more. 50 paces west, where the red earth bleeds into black. He tapped the cluster of symbols again. Dig where the watcher's shadow falls longest at the day's last sigh. Sunset. They needed to be there at sunset. The knowledge was a key, heavy and precious. A hidden spring. Salvation. But also a race against time, suspicion, and the burning sun. Keen's eyes blazed with desperate energy. We go. Now. Before the village. A harsh shout cut through the air, much closer than the village. There. By the madman's rocks. It was Mama Chitty's shrill voice. Adaeze whirled. The old woman stood at the edge of the scrubland, pointing a bony finger straight at them. Behind her, emerging from the path, were Chief Obi and 2 other men, their faces hard. Betrayal. Cold and sharp. Mama Chitty must have followed them unseen. Or perhaps she'd simply guessed, fueled by malice and suspicion. The fragile hope shattered like the water pot. Thief! Mama Chitty screeched, her voice triumphant. And the blacksmith's boy, conspiring with the mad one, stealing secrets. Bad blood. Chief Obi's face darkened like a thundercloud. He strode forward, his authority radiating menace. Seize them, he barked. And that thing they hold. His eyes locked onto the scroll in Adaeze's hands. Panic seized her. Not for herself, but for the scroll, for the knowledge, for the dying hope of water. Keen stepped in front of her, his fists clenched, his body tense like a cornered animal. Run, Adaeze, he growled. Take it. Go. But where? The men advanced, cutting off the path back towards the rocky hills. The only escape was past Emeka's lean-to, deeper into the barren, unfamiliar scrub. Adaeze clutched the scroll, the brittle skin crackling in her grip. She looked at Emeka. His clouded eyes were fixed on the approaching men, a strange calm settling over his weathered face. He reached out and placed his dry, cool hand over hers holding the scroll. His touch was surprisingly strong. The Watcher, he murmured so softly only she could hear, does not flee the storm. It stands and sees through it. His milky eyes seemed to clear for a fleeting second, meeting hers with an ancient, unshakable certainty. The bridge carries the weight now. The chief's shadow fell over them. Adaeze looked up, the sun framing his furious silhouette. Her long neck, the target of a lifetime's scorn, felt impossibly exposed. But beneath Emeka's hand, the heron on the scroll seemed to pulse. The bridge carries the weight now. The words weren't just about water. They were about her. The choice wasn't just to run. It was to stand, to speak, to bridge the chasm of fear with a truth heavier than stolen grain. She took a breath that filled her long throat, the air tasting of dust and defiance. The scroll wasn't stolen. It was found, and what it held belonged to them all. She met Chief Obi's furious gaze, the scroll held high in her trembling, but resolute hand. Listen, child. When the river of scorn runs dry, when the last mocking voice falls silent, that is when the earth herself leans close and whispers her secrets. Chief Obi's shadow loomed over Adaeze, his breath hot with fury. Thief, he spat, his voice thick with accusation. His hand shot out to snatch the brittle scroll from her grasp. Adaeze did not cower. She stood tall, her long neck unbending, the scroll held high. The heron's inked silhouette caught the sunlight, its elegant curve mirroring her own. Not stolen, she said, her voice clear as the river's song. Found. The chief hesitated, his fingers inches from the ancient markings. Behind him, Mama Chitty hissed, lies. She steals food, she steals secrets. That neck of hers, bad luck. Keen stepped forward, his fists still clenched, but his voice was steady. She speaks truth, Chief. The river gave this. It speaks of water. Hidden water. A murmur rippled through the gathered men. Water. The word was magic, heavier than gold in this drought. Chief Obi's eyes narrowed. He snatched the scroll, his thick fingers trembling as he examined the markings. What nonsense is this? These are just scratches. Old man Emeka stirred in the dust. His voice, when it came, was like wind through dry grass. The earth remembers what men forget. He pointed a bony finger at the heron's neck on the scroll, then at Adaeze. The bridge stands before you. Silence. The men shifted uncomfortably. Adaeze felt the weight of their stares, no longer mocking, but uncertain. Searching. Prove it, Chief Obi finally growled. If this thing speaks truth, show us the water. But if you waste our time... His grip tightened on the scroll. Adaeze met his gaze. The fear was still there, coiled in her belly, but beneath it, something stronger. The heron did not flee the storm. It waited. It watched. We go to the stone that weeps, she said. At sunset. The journey was tense, the air thick with unspoken threats. The entire village trailed behind. Chief Obi and his men, Mama Chitty's shrill whispers, curious children, weary mothers with empty water pots balanced on their heads. Adaeze walked ahead with Keen, the red earth crunching underfoot. She could feel Neka's presence behind her, a quiet strength. The stone that weeps rose from the cracked earth like a sentinel, its surface glistening faintly in the fading light. Adaeze approached, her heart pounding. The scroll had said 50 paces west, where the red earth bled into black. She counted carefully, the village's breath held behind her. At 50 paces, the soil darkened. Keen knelt, digging his fingers into the earth. Adaeze joined him, her nails splitting against the hard ground. The villagers watched, some muttering, some praying. Then dampness. A cool kiss against their skin. Keen gasped. They dug harder, frantic now, until their hands hit something smooth and unyielding. A flat stone, carved with the same markings as the scroll. Lift it, someone whispered. Together, Adaeze and Keen pried the stone aside. A sigh rose from the earth. Then water. Clear, cold, bubbling up from some hidden spring beneath. A collective gasp swept through the villagers. A child laughed. A woman wept. Chief Obi stood frozen, the scroll limp in his hands. Mama Chitty's mouth worked soundlessly. Adaeze cupped the water in her palms, letting it spill through her fingers like liquid light. She looked at Keen, at her mother, at the villagers, their faces transformed by wonder. The heron's neck on the scroll had not been a curse. It had been a map. A bridge. Her bridge. The hidden spring became Uzoma's lifeline. Crops revived. The river's return was celebrated with songs that now included Adaeze's name. Keen's forge rang with new energy, crafting tools instead of desperation. Even Mama Chitty, though grudgingly, brought her pot to the spring. One evening, as fireflies danced over the water, Adaeze returned to the Baobab where she'd once wept. The river stone still rested in her pouch, smooth and cool. She touched it, then the now familiar curve of her own neck, no longer a thing of shame, but of pride. Neka's voice carried on the breeze. The heron does not hide its neck, my child. It shows the world how to reach deeper. And so she did. Like this story, let its wisdom ripple through you. Hit like, subscribe for more African tales that stir the soul, and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Comment below. Have you ever carried a burden that later became your strength? Share this tale, because the world needs more bridges, not walls. Watch next. The Silent Boy Who Spoke to Rivers. Another unforgettable journey drops tomorrow. The patience of the water will always reach the shore.